And here we can see Abraham about to sacrifice his son Isaac. Looks like a terrible story, but in fact it points to a time, if Abraham existed. Now I'm just going to talk as if all these people existed. I was taught it's mostly made up. I don't actually believe that. In fact, I think there are babies in these bathwater stories. But in this particular image, we could say, wow, as I thought as a kid, this is kind of sick. God gives him this kid Isaac after his wife is buried for so long. Then he's going to tell him to kill his own kid. And out of faith, Abraham's going to do it until at the last minute God says, oh, just kidding. You don't have to, Abraham. But what we really have in this story is a pointing to the end of human sacrifice. Think about it, 1800 BCE, and yet as of the 1500s, even today it still happens. Sometimes we see evidence of human sacrifice. So there's Abraham, but let's go back in time a bit. And note, as I like to tell students, the Bible is hot off the presses in terms of human history. It is not really a very new book when we look at this timeline of human empires and civilizations. We looked at Sumer and Babylon the first days. Any guesses when the first mention of Israel occurs on this timeline in another culture's writings? The word Israel. Just a guess? Anyone know? Quite astonishing. No one ever does, so don't feel bad. 1100 BCE. That means very late in the day, and about 3,000 years after Sumer has existed already. So the Bible is an incredible compendium of the literature of Egypt and Babylon. And of course, a lot of things that many in the science realm can't accept. But if we were to throw that Bible, baby, and bathwater out, we wouldn't have society today. And that Bible is still a #1 best-selling book on the planet, and is followed by the plurality of people on the planet. So we think of the Adam and Eve story. Some want to laugh, like Bill Meyer, for instance, at anyone who would believe that a talking snake taught a lady, to feed the fruit to her husband. What we really have here with the Bible, though, is a remembrance of life as tribal peoples, the first topic we covered, and the idea that actually civilization caused us pain. And in fact, it is a fact that the tribal hunter-gathering people worked a lot less than we do today, and arguably had a better lifestyle. So what's happening here isn't some silly myth to be thrown out now that we know humans existed more than 5,000 years ago. It points to the fact of our loss of innocence as more animal-type beings, and I don't think that made us worse or lesser. In fact, they say we've devolved cognitively from the people who had to hunt and gather food. I don't think I could hunt anything myself. I can hardly find my glasses. And so just to remember, this is the time Abraham faced. He is from, in fact, Ur, the city at the bottom of Sumer. This makes Judaism and Abrahamic religions Babylonian in origin. The Bible does not like Babylon. Why? Because it is the seat of the first civilizations. If you think of the Cain and Abel story, God likes Abel's gift of sheep offerings, because that is the nomadic tribes people's way of life. But Cain offers agricultural products. God rejects them, right? And then agricultural Cain kills nomadic Abel. So the Bible has a very deep message, I think, in opposing the evils of hierarchically stratified societies with kings and the like. The gods that predate Jehovah, Yahweh, or God, We're very warlike gods. We have Marduk of Babylon, Ashur of Assyria, and Baal of Palestine. We can see Baal with his sword in hand. And here we can see Marduk slaying the chaos monster Tiamat. And out of her body he makes the earth, and out of her consort, the stupid Kingu, he makes human beings from Kingu's blood mixed with Tiamat's body. And lurking behind that is, in Genesis, God breathed on the face of the deep. And it is a cognate, Hebrew tehom, with Tiamat. So I was trained to believe. And so lurking behind the scenes is Marduk and Baal, or Baal, as you may have heard him called in Sunday school. This is what the Tower of Babel would have looked like according to my best scientific reconstruction I can find. And so this was the largest structure on the whole planet at the time. And it was a symbol for Israelite religion of arrogance and human pride and the power that comes with civilization and society. Abraham, as we know, will travel from Ur to what is today called Israel and Palestine, but belonged to the Canaanites before Abraham ever emerged. The Canaanites worshipped El, and we find this word El in the Hebrew Bible. The first 5 books are Torah, the 5 books of Moses. The earliest phases call God El, but also Elohim, which is a plural of El, Eloh. Eloh is a cognate with the Arabic word Allah. How about that? Meaning God. But Elohim means the gods. And so in Genesis, when it says, let us make humans in our image, it points to a polytheistic background in Genesis that will, of course, dissolve by the time of Isaiah. But here we can see El with a wife, just like all the other city-state religions. He has a son, Baal, and some think Yam, Nahar, the god of the sea, might have evolved into Yahweh. That is very speculative. I won't hold my sign my name to that. But here's Baal doing the standard heroic things. Who was this guy, and why does the Bible dislike him throughout the writings of the prophets? His name simply means master or lord. So it's not a proper name. Here he's killing Lotan, known to the Bible as Leviathan, and many motifs will live on the same way. Here's Hercules killing the Hydra, and so many heroic things Baal does. Now, when it comes to this story, the original Babylonian flood story just had Utnapishtim on a raft with some goats and chickens as the Tigris-Euphrates flooded. I think we talked about that the first day. The Bible has expanded this story, Paul Bunyan style, into every animal and the giant ark and so forth. There was, in fact, a great flood, though, 5000 BCE. The Bible's remembered through these other people's literature some amazing geological facts they've proven. I could go on about this, but let's look at the biggest one. You can see the Black Sea up here prior to 6500 BCE. And then the Hellespont floods, breaks, and the Mediterranean fills in all of this region today. And the Bible even has the ark landing right on the border of the Black Sea, not in Israel as you might suspect. And they found cities buried at the bottom of the Black Sea. So there was a great flood. It just didn't happen to cover the entire planet or wipe out all of life, but there you have it. For a Bronze Age book, the Bible does a remarkable job. And for many millennia, people thought it was an actual history of the planet in Roman and Greek times. The Bible sees all humans emerging from Noah's son, Japhethites or Europeans, Hamites or African Semites, are Arabs and Hebrews and the rest. The Bible doesn't know about Chinese people, so there's no son from Noah for the Chinese, right? We can't expect a Bronze Age text to be a 21st century work of science. And that's where I get frustrated with both fundamentalists and atheists who just want to write off this incredible book. Abraham is told, and it turns out to be true, his descendants will be more numerous than the stars. And to this day, right today, 3.4 billion people on the planet are either Christians, Jews, or Muslims, and thus descendants of Abraham. Now, here he is. He's not simply a Bedouin trader. He's more of a rich caravan type trader. So in other words, not a king, not a big guy, but definitely a powerful merchant, and not just simply a desert dweller. And here is a depiction of Abraham's meeting with Melchizedek, the righteous king. And we see this Canaanite king and Abraham are both worshiping El together. In those days, when you came to a new land, you worshiped the local god. It would be as if, in Wisconsin, we worship Packer, don't we? But if we traveled across the border in those Bronze Age times, we would worship Viking. Viking has this turf, and it's like a franchise for a McDonald's or something like that. But we can see here there's no distinctive Israelite religion from this story. And Abraham here in this famous scene, God tells his wife, who's 80-some years old, she's going to have a kid, and she laughs. So hence, when Isaac, or he who laughs, is born, Abraham kicks out his oldest son and his mother, Hagar, and Ishmael. Muslims and Arabs will see this as the beginnings of the Arabic peoples, and thus the beginnings of Islam. They see Ishmael as their ancestor, and it's even said Ishmael and Abraham together built the Kaaba shrine in Mecca, believe it or not. Here he is again, the end of human sacrifice, but mostly it's Abraham's utter faith in this God. What we're going to note about these three religions, unlike any we've looked at so far, is that this is one continuing storyline. These are historical religions. Often it is a boast of Jews and Christians and Muslims that there's an historical religion. Well, that is a claim to fame for sure. It is valuable. But we've seen the value in these other non-historical religions of Asia. And so, genealogy is very important to the Bible. So-and-so begat so-and-so, and all of this going back to origins historically is a critical feature. Abraham gives birth to Isaac, gives birth to Jacob. Jacob then is, in fact, Israel. His name, Yaakov, or Jacob, means the supplanter, because he stole the inheritance, if we know this, from his brother Esau through a trick of putting fake hair on his hands. Sounds kind of lame, doesn't it? Isaac couldn't see too well, so he gives his inheritance to Jacob. Throughout the Jewish religion, the smart, kind of scrawny guy who's mama's favorite tends to prevail over the big oaf. It'll happen with David and Goliath, happens again and again. Here we see Jacob going up Jacob's ladder to heaven. Here we see where the word Israel comes from. Jacob is struggling with this angel, and Israel literally means he who struggles with God. So that's where we get the name Israel. It is a second name for Jacob. And the whole tradition will indeed be a struggle. Unlike many of the other religions, it will be about sin and disobedience to one powerful being up there. And speaking of which, we move through quite a few centuries already. And here we can see Moses receiving the laws from, now we have a new name for God. Not the generic kind of Canaanite El or Elohim, the gods. Somehow, miraculously, in the 13th century, before the Common Era, give or take, This man Moses, with an Egyptian name, who the Bible tells us is Egyptian, and who is living around the time of Akhenaten, who will deny the existence of the many gods of Egypt and proclaim the sun disk is the only God, the Aten. We wonder if there's not a connection between this Moses, whose name we may know other Egyptian pharaohs like Tutmoses, this man with an Egyptian name leading these slaves on a rebellion out of Egypt. If there's not a connection with Akhenaten's kind of monotheism. That's speculative, but the Bible tells us God and his heavenly hosts were so powerful and enormous that Mount Sinai had to expand to contain God's glory. So unlike Buddhism or Confucianism or Taoism, we're talking about, or even Hinduism, powerful as those gods and goddesses were at killing demons and the like, this God of Israel is immense and enormous and transcendent and completely beyond our world. Our world is completely dependent on the God of Israel according to Abrahamic practitioners. And so here we can see the only way we can depict God according to Jewish tradition. And these four letters, I can call God the four letters, or I can call God, as a devout Jew, the Tetragrammaton, which means the four letters in Greek. But I can in no wise depict God, and why? Here Moses is smashing the golden calf, simply a fertility rich object, and associated with Baal worship, but many others. The calf, of course, gives milk and all this. And Moses smashes his tablets of the law, destroying this calf. And this is a motif that Jews and Muslims and Jehovah's Witnesses and a number of other Protestants will maintain is the proper attitude towards God. Never make an image of God or Christ. So here, after wandering, as we know, for 40 years in the desert, Moses hits the boundary of Abraham's old Canaan. Now, if we take the story as true, these Israelites came down originally from Canaan. The 12 tribes of Israel, or Jacob, they're his sons. And they are first welcomed by their lost brother Joseph in Egypt. And then in time enslaved, and of course we know through the plagues of his plagues, Moses channels through God. They escape Pharaoh's grasp. And Moses, as we said yesterday, is a prophet, which means he is not divine. He won't be allowed into the promised land because he actually claims credit for a miracle, bringing water from a rock, if we recall, and that is an abomination to God according to Judaism. So here we see him channeling again God's power. His two priests, Aaron and Levi, are holding his hands up because those arms are channeling God's power to assist Joshua as he initially battles the Canaanites. And there's just so much uniqueness and detail to this story. This is why I accept its truth to a great degree. So then we know the Israelites now, through God's almighty power, expand into this land that has been known as Palestine, named after the Philistines who've been there prior to Joshua's contest, believe it or not. They've been there longer than Israel. And they settle down into, of course, these various tribes and completely conquer the Canaanites. Frankly, it's a genocide. There are things about the Bible that aren't that pretty, in my opinion, and holy war is one of those things that we don't see in the Asian religions, but we do see it in the Abrahamic religions. And so the conquest is complete by the time, especially we can say, of David. One thing, now this is a very big headache here. People reconstructing the Bible, and mostly it's been those Germans. They like to slice things up nice and frosted. They're good with watches. They're just as good with the Bible. So they sliced it all up into these bits. And now we can see, you can see from here, before 1100, it's all oral tradition, these stories about Abraham and the life. And then the Yahwist, the writer who uses the word Yahweh to speak of God, his texts are written roughly 900 to 1,000 before the Common Era, so the Bible doesn't exist yet. The E refers to the Elohimist, the man whose writings, or men whose writings, form those texts that refer to God as Elohim. The P to the priests who compiled both, and then the Deuteronomist who added much to the law and to the stories. They've been edited, they've been scrubbed up. And even 2 creation stories in Genesis. One I mentioned, let man create us. Well, we will create man in our image, is one creation story by the Elohimist. The Yahwist tells us the story of Eve emerging from Adam's side. So in fact, there's not one even Genesis creation story, but at least, well, 2. And so, by the time of King David, and we may know his story, the scrawny, smart guy uses his sling and kills the giant Goliath with a rock. No one was brave enough to face Goliath, allegedly. I think 9'7". Do you believe that? I don't know if I do. Point is, David and Solomon will establish a big empire, and this is going to be the heyday for Israel. It will never be this big or this powerful as in the time of Kings David and Solomon. And Solomon will build the first temple. Having been nomadic people, they just had carried the Ark of the Covenant, the laws of Moses, in a tabernacle or a tent. Now they will have a temple. So there's the empire, and there is an alleged reconstruction of Solomon's temple. Then what many don't know, around 800 before the Common Era, the 12 tribes, the empire, if you will, kingdom of David and Solomon, break up into a civil war. And what we have here are the northern 11 tribes cut themselves off from Judah, the biggest tribe. And in fact, Judah is technically speaking not Israel. And the word Jew or Jewish refers to this tribe, not the northern faction. There is a term for these northern Israelites, and there are a few hundred around today who claim descent from this northern Israel, and it may surprise you to learn they are called Samaritans. So when Jesus, for example, is talking about the Good Samaritan, it would be like a Southern Confederate Johnny Reb talking about the good Yankee. Might be offensive, right? We don't know how offensive Jesus' stories are without knowing the history and background. So they will go on their own way and have their holy mountain, Mount Gerizim, and they will tell you to this day, they're the true descendants of Moses' tradition. Those Judeans broke off from them, not the other way around. So as time progresses, the Bible becomes really Judea's possession as we have it today. We get it from the Judeans. In the Bible, after the 5 books of Moses and the mythological elements, Tower of Babel, Genesis, and the like, we get real history. And the Bible is amazingly accurate with history. We don't see this in India, or really even China. China's a little better at history. India's great at maths and abstract thought, as we may have noticed with Buddhism, Hinduism, but not at history. We don't even know when the Buddha was born at all. But we do know that, for example, Nineveh fell in 727 on the afternoon, very close. The Bible's within a decade of that date. In the Bible, we see these anti-temple prophets. And that means that these figures, Amos, Jeremiah, and Elijah, oppose the subjugation of the poor by the rich, and they oppose the use of the temple and God's name to engage in enslaving other people. So these are the anti-temple prophets, and they are the ones who castigate Israel for falling away from the covenant, because, let's not forget, it is a slave-freeing religion from the time of Moses on. So it is an anti-slavery religion. And I will argue that in European culture or modern America, and historically largely the Islamic countries, we see a relative degree of egalitarian social action compared to the Eastern and Asian religions, where we have things like the caste system or Confucius' hierarchy built in. The Bible does not like these things. And let's just take a look. We can't forget the pro-temple prophets. For Haggai, build me a house, says God. The other gods have houses. I deserve a nice temple. But we'll see the anti-temple prophets take a different view. Let's look at this scene from Elijah's life. And by the way, his name is big propaganda. El is Yah. That's what his name means. That means the generic God of the Middle East, or the Levant, Canaan region, is actually Yahweh. So we have a shift in perspective, and here he's castigating the evil Ahab and the even more evil, painted lady Jezebel. The Bible does not like painted ladies. Sorry. I bet I offended most ladies here. The Bible does not like it if you style your hair either. The Bible wants humble men and women. People forget men too should wear head coverings and have beards like God intended. Those are Bible fashions. Muslims get picked on for that today, but nobody thinks, well, geez, this is Elijah here, look. It's the same style as Osama bin Laden. Uh-oh, did I go too far? Make you mad, would I? So when we look at those fashions, I think it's important to remember the tremendous history of Bible fashions and why there are these Bible fashions. It's so that we'll all treat each other equally, and we won't have kings and painted ladies. Now, Elijah defeats the prophets of Baal, we may recall, in lighting literally a holocaust, the burnt offering. Jehovah delivers, Baal does not. But then we see something that does play out as I see it. I call it as I see them. That plays out in the later history of the Abrahamic religions. And we don't see these things that I'm about to show you in the Asian religions. And here it is. After Elijah defeats those priests, he orders them to be massacred. So the intolerance of social hierarchies and the like of the Bible is also, to some degree, an intolerance of other beliefs and traditions going back to him, at least. Even, we could say, Moses, smashing the golden calf. Elijah is one of the few to ascend into heaven without dying. And here we have Amos, and he goes to the northern tribes of Israel. He's actually a Judean. But he castigates Amaziah the priest. And he says, because you oppress the poor and needy, Amaziah, and you support this with the temple you're running, God will send the Assyrians to cook your women, those he calls them, cows of Bashan. Right? That's very insulting to call women cows. But he's referring to the aristocratic elite who, quote, sell the needy for a pair of shoes. So this is the baby in the Bible bathwater, this idea that God hates the oppression of the poor. And so, in fact, it will happen. The Assyrians will haul away the aristocrats of Israel. And Amos is right. Hosea marries a prostitute to show that Israel, too, is a prostitute and is not a proper, obedient wife to her husband, Jehovah, Yahweh. And so we see this kind of theme, and we see really a repudiation of the standard God set up with Zeus and friends in the Bible as Jehovah becomes increasingly abstract, as an abstract principle beyond our world altogether. So the Jews have quite the history of sorrow and suffering, as I bet we all know. Again, unlike these Asian religions. And they will be hauled away in the north to Assyria and held in captivity. They will hardly recover. They, as I say, barely exist today as Samaritans, but their elite and educated, the priests included, are hauled away to Assyria, and within 100 years, so are the elite and the educated of Judea. It's not every person who is held in captivity, but all the intellectuals, the repositories of the religious tradition. By the middle of the first millennium, before the Common Era, does anybody remember the word for that time? Axial age. Students, it takes, I don't know how many, get that concept. The Bible has one too. We saw it with the Buddha, Confucius, Lao Tzu, and the Upanishads in Hinduism. The overarching framework appears to Isaiah. In the time of Elijah, we can see he's battling the gods of the priests of Baal. And we can see evidence in the 5 books of Moses that there are other gods, just Jehovah's our God. And our God can beat up the other gods. Our God can beat up Pharaoh. As I say, it's going from Packers to Viking, though. Your God rules a certain turf, but by the time of Isaiah, it's very clear that there is only one God. And here is the famous phrase that points to the certainty that the Bible has reached an axial age perspective. Isaiah knows there is no other God but the God of Israel. There is only one God. Heaven is his throne, and earth is my footstool. And that pretty much sums up the relationship of God to human beings in the Abrahamic religions. Only now there is no Vishnu, according to Isaiah. There is no Jude. That's really about the only competitor for major godness. Because, of course, the Buddha doesn't have a god, nor does Lao Tzu nor Confucius. No gods in those religions, so we can let Isaiah have this claim. And so, denouncing other gods very clearly in Isaiah, let's just look, he makes it so certain. No God formed before me, nor will there be after me. I am Yahweh. There is no other Savior but me. And it's worth mentioning the meaning of this name for God, Yahweh. YHWH are Hebrew letters pointing to translate it best into English, he or that which brings into being. Not a personal name at all. It's an indirect reference to the creator of everything. So by Isaiah's time we have all that, and idols are forbidden in Israel. By the 623, Josiah will get rid of all the feminine images in the temple of Judea. There were feminine goddesses worshipped as late as that time in history by Israelites. He has the Ashtaroth trees cut down. This refers to the worship of Astarte or Ashtaroth, a female goddess. I met a woman who was doing her dissertation, she said, on Mrs. Yahweh. Sorry, ladies, Mrs. Yahweh. Jehovah divorced her, apparently. And who knows what happened to her? She's gone. Josiah gets rid of, and this surprises people, male prostitutes in the temple. Whoa, Powell, you're making that up. But yes, prior to, well, this is the time of the Deuteronomists, 623 or so, King Josiah The temple of Judea, of the Jews, was a very different place than it will be after the axial age and after the middle of the first millennium. So prior to the temple period, God was the Shekinah, or presence, or tent, literally, of the people. And the Judeans and the Israelites maintain a certain, after the captivities, they return to their homelands. Persian Emperor Cyrus allows the Jewish elite to return to their land, and they do. And by the time of Alexander the Great, just shortly after they return, they are now dominated by Greek culture. Now, you can imagine the Greeks erecting idols to Zeus and the other gods would not please these these Judeans. Now, we're going to call them Judeans, not Israelites, because that's where the Bible's taken us. And imagine this. Well, in modern culture, we often in the media are looking down on Muslims for their women having a head covering. Men are supposed to as well, by the way. But what if we took the opposite route? As I ask my students, what if I were to throw the discus nude in the Marathon Park? Oh my goodness. That's what these Greek guys did. Those depictions of them naked are for real. Gymnos means naked boy. Gymnasium, or a gym, is the naked place for the men to do their wrestling and everything. I bet even we prefer a bit of Bible fashion, don't we? Even if we're atheist or agnostic, I would imagine I'd be arrested if I tried that, right? Students always say I'd last 10 minutes and the cops will be there for me. So this was enormously offensive to the Jews in Judea now, as were so many of these idolatrous elements the Greeks carried with them, and they dominated them. But what happens in this period, Judaism, now we can call it Judaism for sure, it's not Israelite religion, spreads throughout the Greek Empire because these are advanced, well-educated people. It's not for nothing the Bible came through and dominated even our modern society. The Epic of Gilgamesh doesn't. Hardly anyone's even heard of it. And likewise, Hellenism and Greek philosophy. We looked at Socrates as the axial age figure for the Greeks. And we'll see the idea that Socrates and Plato and friends had of a universal consciousness rather than Zeus and friends, these cartoony people, becomes increasingly the norm for the educated Greek elite. This idea converges in some times, that really takes centuries, with this Jewish idea of the abstract creator God who is beyond our world. These ideas conflict, but they will come together, both in Judaism and the successor to Judaism, or I should say not successor, the major branch of Judaism that we today call Christianity. Because we can't forget Christianity is a branch, but a legitimate branch in my opinion. Many Jews say, Christianity, that's a fake and fraud, worshiping a divine man. That's not Jewish. Well, yes, it is, in fact. Judaism is many things, like many religions are. They get free for 100 years, and the Hanukkah festival is very unimportant for Jewish people. If you want to send a Jewish person a card, a Yom Kippur card will be better. The Day of Atonement for Sin, although I don't know if Hallmark makes such a card. Right? Hanukkah, the oil in the temple lamps burnt a few days longer than they were supposed to. It's a little holiday for Jewish people, and many I have known get annoyed that Christians and others think, Hanukkah, not a big deal. It just happens to come near Christmas, so for Jewish little boys and girls, they get 11 days of presents. I like to brag about that, just to outdo the Christians. So there's the second temple rebuilt when the Jews return to their homeland, and by the time of Jesus, we have at least 4 branches. of Jewish tradition. The Zealots, who want to kick the Romans out by force, we could say like the modern-day Zionists. Not necessarily that religious about Jehovah, but they do want their culture preserved and they want to rule themselves and kick the Romans out. That will be a disastrous policy for the Jews, though. You don't mess with Rome. And then the Essenes, mystics, who many think Jesus may well have been an ascetic mystic because John the Baptist is his associate. And John the Baptist, as we know, opposes the Jewish political elite to the point where Salome has his head eventually on a platter for Herod. But these people were mystics and expected the end times and God's appearance at any moment. Then we have the Sadducees. If we read the Gospel of John carefully, we see an account of the trial of Jesus, and it seems pretty clear to me it's the Sadducees who want Jesus dead. The Romans have no interest in executing what they thought of as religious crazy guys. They didn't. They're worried about these zealots, though. And why would the Sadducees are running the temple? The Pharisees are actually the good guys and the ancestors of all modern Jews. Jewish rabbi's daughter once said, you know, I really hate it when Christians tear off on the Pharisees. She says, those are my ancestors. They created synagogue Judaism, not the big temple with its big business. So why would the temple priest here, Caiaphas, oppose Jesus? And who's responsible for this crucifixion? It is a Roman method of execution, particularly cruel. Jewish methods of execution, had Jesus been killed by those, would have been strangulation. Much better way to go than this. Tens of thousands of people were executed by Romans for what they thought were treason or rebellion, with what I like to call these as billboards, basically saying, don't mess with Rome. Tens of thousands of people on the Appian Way were strung up like this in northern Italy for rebellion. The Spartacus slave rebellion, those people were all crucified. So you say, well, Powell, then clearly he was killed by the Romans. And of course, you know, all of this consciousness comes from being on the invasion route. But let's look quickly. Now, here's why Caiaphas would want him dead. Do we remember making the whip of cords and overturning the tables of the money changers? What would happen, and like to ask my students, if I went into a Catholic or Protestant church in Warsaw, and I was so mad they were supporting rich things, a lot of rich people, let's say, in that church, and I quoted Amos and the Bible guys, and I made a whip of cords, and I went up after the offerings collected, pushed the table over, and started beating the priest or minister, what would happen to me, you think? Would they say, this is a great prophet of God? I didn't know what would happen to me. I'd at least be arrested, and I'd probably serve some time. I doubt they would execute me. Well, right, you're right. I guess we did it twice. So let's look at this man, and here is the big dilemma for Christians. And where we look at Christian denominations, they all fall on a spectrum that generally is looking at how much is Jesus human versus how much is Jesus God. For example, we'll look at this. Just the issue of, is Jesus a prophet, or is he the very God of gods and the creator of the universe? And there's always been the spectrum, and we'll look at that. Jesus is from the boondocks, if you will. He is a Jew, but he's living among Samaritans, and not only Samaritans, but Greeks. It seems certain to me he knew at least as much Greek as you and I know Spanish. We all know what a burrito is, right? We all know a taco and the like. We all know some Spanish, and he knew at least some. And he knew Greeks or Gentiles, people who were not Jewish. In fact, the Decapolis, let's see, They're the Decapolis. Those are the 10 cities comprised of Greek immigrants. There's a lot of tension with the Jews and these immigrants coming into their land, and their dominance by Roman authority. Again, idolatrous Roman authority with the worship of the emperor, very offensive to Jews. But Jesus is this kind of lover, not like Krishna. He is not an erotic lover, but he's a lover of children. And women are attracted to him. In fact, they fund his ministry. It is women who put together his expensive, seamless gown, for example. And then, as we just mentioned, this scene in the temple, read the Gospel of John for an account. Caiaphas coerces Pilate to kill Jesus because he needs Jesus gone because the temple makes a lot of money for him and the Sadducees. But he doesn't want to kill Jesus himself through some judgment of Jesus as blasphemous for using the divine name, although it seems that's the reason, according to the Talmud, much later writing. They hung Yeshu from a tree for practicing magic and leading the people astray. So he has two issues. He opposes the use of God's temple to make money, and he's used the divine name to perform miracles. And for Jews, that is not allowed. So, here he is before the night he is betrayed. There's been more and more evidence that Jesus and Mary Magdalene had something going. You don't have to go as far as the Da Vinci Code to see that when we've had the Gospel of Mary say he loved her more than his disciples. And this latest Mary fragment, something's cooking there. Is Jesus quite the celibate, priestly type that he's painted to be? I don't know. I'll just throw that out there. But here he is as King of the Jews. This is just a mockery of both the Jews and this now early Jewish movement. And when we translate even the word Christianity, not many know this, but Christ means, of course, Messiah, or Mashiach, which literally means the anointed. The first Mashiachs, or Messiahs, were in fact these judges who conquered Canaan. They were generals anointed to lead the Israelites. But now this word Christ, of course, will be expanded with Christianity. And let's see why and how that happens. Again, women appear at his resurrection. They're there while he's crucified. They don't run away, unlike, if we recall, Peter does. So the enormous appeal of Jesus' message for women and the outcast of any sort, even the tax collectors. They're collecting taxes for the Romans. That makes them traitors. And hence his unpopularity. The Christian movement will spread very quickly after Jesus' death because of the Roman Empire and the roads. And St. Paul the Apostle will travel by ship to Rome and many, many places, as we may know, within the first few decades after Christ's death. And from there, of course, everywhere else. There will be Asian brands of Christianity that don't look anything like Protestant or Catholic brands do here. And we get three types of Christians pretty early on. Judaizers will say, Christ, Jesus of Nazareth, Yeshua, that's his name. Yeshua HaNatsri, if you want to know his name. He is a prophet. Muslims agree with this Jewish Christian point of view as well. And the Gnostics who say, no, he's not only God, he is so much God that he didn't even need to eat or defecate. And then, of course, Paul the Apostle. Let's just look at this. Here's his brother, James the Just, who doesn't appear in his ministry, but after Jesus' death, he's part of Jesus' family. That makes him specialer, to use some bad English, than anybody else. And he is head of the Jewish Christian movement. He worships at the temple. He, too, is executed just before the Romans come and smash the Jews for one of two major times. And here it is, faith without works is dead. Martin Luther wanted to get rid of the letter of James because it was, quote, too Jewish. How about that? He wanted to get rid of the Jewish elements in the New Testament. Not many know this. Gnosticism, though, look at St. Thomas on an Indian stamp. We already know how Indian religion works. We saw how Krishna is an avatar of Vishnu. That's what the Gnostics said Jesus was. The Gnostics claim the God of the Old Testament or Hebrew Bible is evil, is rather ignorant, is jealous, violent, and is not the source of wisdom. Jesus is from a God beyond his or Jehovah's knowing, the true God of light and life, and Jesus is a projection into our world. And thus he never died according to them. He magically swaps bodies with a guy named Simeon according to their writings, and Simeon is crucified, not Jesus. Believe it or not. The Gnostics believe that, in fact, their magic mantras, meditation, and true knowledge, that's what the name Gnostic means, the knowers, unlike the Judaizers or the followers of this guy. How is it that St. Paul's letters win the day for Christianity? Is it that he is more genius than the Gnostics? Or more genius than the Judaizers? It isn't. It's actually that St. Paul creates the synthesis that will win the day. He incorporates enough Jewish material, for example. For him, Christ certainly came in the flesh, it seems. He's not a Gnostic, although the Gnostics claim him too. But his big thing is to break with Judaism. And he claims, making a big argument in Corinthians, that Abraham was chosen by God for his faith, not for what he did. And he makes the big argument that all foods are clean now. You don't have to follow kosher laws. And what made Christianity in particular successful over the Judaizers, they'll die out, although they'll reemerge as Jehovah's Witnesses and many other heresies, if you will, was getting rid of circumcision. A lot of Greeks and Romans admired Jewish monotheism by this point in time. But how many men in this room would convert to a religion that requires circumcision? Not me. Well, what did I say? I'm afraid they got a lot of us at birth. Yeah. Right. Thanks to Judaism. Darn it. Okay, I guess. So Paul synthesizes the Jewish and Greek elements most successfully. His letters are written in excellent Greek, as is the Gospel of Luke. The Gospel of Mark is written in Greek with quite a few grammar mistakes. For example, it even ends with the word "and," which is bad in any language. And what part? So they add endings later. So Christianity will spread through the Roman Empire, and it will be enormously popular with women and slaves. Once you get the majority of the population, half of it are women, always, roughly, and in olden times, maybe 80 to 90% were slaves. And so that made it dangerous. And we wonder, why did the Romans persecute and execute these Christians? Now it's not Jews doing this. Now it becomes Romans persecuting Christians. And look at this terrible, terrible treatment. Fed to lions, burnt at stakes, you name it. And by this time, of course, Christianity is turning even more and more Greek. We see in the Bible even Jesus turns water into wine. That's Dionysus' job. He's called the Good Shepherd. That's Hermes' title. And here Hercules descends into Hades and then is exalted as a constellation and thus a divine being. None of this fact of descending into hell and then exalted to heaven, we don't see that in the New Testament. That's the increasing penetration of Greek and Roman thought into this once Jewish religion. And so this is why the Christians were persecuted. It always shocks people. Perhaps some of you lived through the McCarthy period. Anybody? Okay, we got a few. Before my time slightly, but this may remind you of the McCarthy Red Scare stuff. The Christians were atheists to the Romans. They would not worship the emperor as divine. They rejected the existence of Jupiter and friends, so they're atheists. They're communists, and it says clearly in Acts, the book of Acts, the Christians shared everything in common. The rich shared with the poor members, and they lived in tightly knit communities. They didn't offer incense to the emperor because they're not going to worship an idol. It's that much Jewish still. And they're not going to offer their allegiance to a state. Their kingdom is not of this world, as Jesus said. Jehovah's Witnesses still hold a lot of these things to their hearts to this day. But for eating babies, you're going to wonder, gee, Powell, why do you have that there? That's kind of crazy. Why would Romans and Greeks believe that the Christians were eating babies? Well, think about this. When the Romans would wanted an abortion, they didn't want their baby. They would leave the babies by the rubbish heap in town, hoping someone might pick up the baby and raise it. With the only chance that baby's got. The Christians would collect these babies. Christians have been pro-life for a long time, very long time. So they take these babies and raise them as Christians. Then Greeks and Romans know that, oh, the Christians drink blood and eat bodies at their festival. Where did they get that body and that blood? Ooh, must be they're eating those babies. There were cults that ate babies, fiestian feasts. Now we know that's not true, and that's why we should never suspect a new religion as a cult is just bad. Really, we need to investigate it like we might Scientology, right? Well, I didn't just judge it, I had to look into that one. And then I thought it was kind of crazy. But that's what happened there. We'll get 4 major churches. And we can see this, I took a course in iconography, and the Catholic Union priest said absolutely, Christian art comes directly from Greek artistic practices. So we don't see depictions of images in Judaism, but now we do in Christianity, even statues and idols. A big cry, a far cry from the Jewish original religion. The church fathers will finalize the Greek and Jewish synthesis. And Constantine will finally, because by the time 325, when Constantine declares the religion is legal and they can practice in public, and he will start the first Christian church and convene the Council of Nicaea to codify what books should be in the New Testament and what should be rejected. The Gospel of Thomas, did it make it? Actually, Christians in India still hold that as their major gospel, as you might imagine. Indian Hinduism is quite a bit like Gnosticism. So this becomes the official Christianity of the Roman Empire. And then St. Augustine, I should mention, too, incorporates the doctrine of original sin into the religion. It wasn't there. And the Eastern Church rejects this idea that we're born with sin just through the act of intercourse, and we'll see his emphasis on celibacy will become a Catholic emphasis. That will not be true with the Eastern Orthodox churches. The Eastern Orthodox tend to view Christ like this, a little more leaning towards a Gnostic view. They talk about theosis for every Christian. This means that if I love and follow God's will closely enough, I can too attain Jesus' powers, the powers of God. And this is the Christ the Eastern Orthodox tell you is the real picture. But in the West, where the persecution was more severe, actually here, let's just take a look. There's the Nicene Creed, kind of summed up briefly. We don't see this stuff in the New Testament, though. It's a big evolution of this religion. The first church, Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, today Istanbul, and the oldest in existence, the Vatican, of course. The Latin Patriarchate is what the Orthodox call it, not Roman Catholicism, because they are too. The universal church, they claim. And so the pagan religions are gone by the 6th century, and it is a Christian Europe that looks something like this. A Roman world with Germans just poised to pour into it, and the Romans are as afraid of Germans as in the United States many are of Mexicans, right? You know, a big wall, keep them Germans out. We know those barbarians, what they'll do if you give them an inch. So that's the world. The Huns will push the Germans, though, into Rome. Rome falls, and now we have Vandals. That's where the word comes from. German tribes people call Vandals, the Goths, the Visigoths. Rome is trashed, except in the east, the Byzantine Empire lives on. It will become the seat of Orthodox Christianity. And then 7th century, we're moving pretty fast, Muhammad will become the next famous anti-temple prophet. Think about it. Why is Muhammad opposed? Because he opposes the idolatry of the Meccan temple complex that was big in his region. In this sense, he follows the prophets of Israel, but also Jesus himself in being an anti-temple prophet who advocates for the equality of all people and is famous for freeing 24,000 slaves in his life, believe it or not. And how does this little Arab ragtag Muslim army defeat finally the great Persian superpower and even push the Byzantine superpower back and expand within 100 years of Muhammad's death all the way from Spain to Afghanistan? Well, imagine you're a Persian slave soldier, and you know you're fighting people that if you surrender and run to their side, they'll give you your freedom. Would you still fight for the Shah of Iran if you knew you could be a free man if you just joined the Muslims? So these guys often, they keep on running across the battlefield, I surrender. And then they're using their fancy Persian weaponry on the Persian Empire itself. It crumbled in the face of one powerful ideology, Islam. And of course, coming right out of Judaism that we looked at. Europe looks like this then. The Catholic Church is the only thing holding Western Europe together. Thanks God for the Pope, I say, in the Dark Ages. And Europeans, and we can say Catholics, in the Holy Roman Empire as it's called, are feeling squeezed by both Mongols from the east and Muslims in Spain. Even the Muslims will get as far as invading France and are defeated at Tours. But there's immense paranoia in Europe about Islam. And this is an important awareness competency, I think, for everyone to know. My students, I repeat this slide a few times. For 1,000 years, Islam is the scientific superpower. Islam is the place where things like refined sugar and coffee are developed. Could America even exist without refined sugar? I don't think so. So we owe Islam so much, and we forget that every culture has its downs, its peaks, and its valleys, right? And Europe was in a valley when Islam was at a peak. In the meantime, the Orthodox and Catholics split in 1054. What is the reason? The Orthodox will tell you the Pope got too big for his britches. He claimed to be the first among equals among the four classic patriarchates, and the Patriarch of Constantinople and the Pope almost simultaneously excommunicate each other, which means there is no real Christian in the world, because they had equal authority, and it was like matter and antimatter. I kind of laugh at that. The Orthodox say, look, we never changed. The Pope changed. Well, the Pope had to change to keep Western Europe at all organized. The Church was the only government when Rome fell. Roman Catholic Church is modeled on Roman law and Roman government. So there were no choices there, but the Orthodox say, look, not only is the view of the atonement a dark view in their opinion of Christ and the meaning of Christianity, as opposed to the idea that we can become divine through Christ. But because the Pope claims so much power, this is why the Protestants rebel against the Pope. So, these are the two views of Christ. You have the Roman Catholic and the Eastern Orthodox, and we have then Crusades, a false view of Muhammad as an insane, arrogant egomaniac who will kill you if you don't convert to worshiping him. Well, that's not Islam, is it? I mean, I hope we don't think so. I think some people think that's that religion, but what religion would spread that was really like that? So the Crusades are not forgotten by Muslims, and this is the social structure in Europe. The peasant crusade will even involve a children's crusade where children are marched in front of Turkish Muslim soldiers, and because these peasants believe, Peter the Hermit, because God is guiding these children, they will not be defeated. Do you think they were defeated? The Turkish Muslim soldiers didn't kill the little kids. They just marched them into slavery. That's not too bad, is it? And so there are the many, many crusades, 14. Do you think the Muslim world has forgotten about that? Do you think they might be a little annoyed with Christendom in Europe? Why are you pummeling us? What's the point? What a holy land. They preserved the temples and all this, and Jews and Christians had to pay a little extra tax, but they weren't persecuted or executed. The Quran forbids that. And so there is what Europe's looking like. But here's another thing that happened during the Crusades. You think Americans would ever forget an event like this, where the Crusaders were starving to such a degree that they got their captured Muslim soldiers and eat them like you might a deer in northern Wisconsin. So that's the Siege of Murat, and that's not like a news report. That's more like a bragging thing. Look what we did to those Turkish Muslim soldiers. As well as beheadings, and then Arabic thinkers, Muslim thinkers, will feed very heavily into people like St. Thomas Aquinas' thought. Science is reintroduced to Europe by way of the Islamic world. In the meantime, the Inquisition takes place. And here we can see Galileo, who will just say, okay, the world is flat, inquisitors. But here is Martin Luther. And this is the beginning of civil war in Europe, as Martin Luther again becomes another anti-temple prophet. Witch burnings take place in this time, but here's the reason for the season for Protestants. He will oppose the Pope and the taking of money for expensive temples in the same way Muhammad did, Jesus did, Amos did. This is a long tradition and a continuing strain in Abrahamic thought. So selling indulgences to get great-granddad out of purgatory seemed ridiculous to him. And of course, Henry VIII needs a divorce, so he creates the Episcopalian or Anglican Church. My own background goes back to this cold fellow. He will be a Bible-believing Calvin right here and give rise to Baptists and Presbyterians and all kinds of so-called free churches. We get this civil war in Europe. I've read estimates that 100 million died in this war. It continues on to this day in Northern Ireland and a few other small places. And of course, these guys will be expelled from England for, well, banning color, Cromwell, banning Christmas because it's not in the Bible. And these guys will become the ethos of America. Really Calvinist Protestantism. How many Lutheran presidents have we had? Anybody know? It's very surprising. 0. Only one Catholic. All the rest are Calvinist Protestants, which is very odd, isn't it? So, and we can see the red here. Lutheran land is in blue, Catholic Lutheran land, and the red are Calvinist type churches, the Bible Belt, we could call it. Now, I didn't give myself time, but we're going to look at some features of Islam. Islam means submission to God or peace. It's from the term salam, which is cognate with Hebrew shalom, which literally makes a Muslim a peacemaker, which I think is very funny. If they translate that in the news. The peaceniks blew up our tank today. Sounds kind of silly, but it's not Buddhist peace. And same angel Gabriel will speak to Muhammad as spoke to Mary. We can depict Muhammad this way, but not with a form. And this is Allah. We can depict the God, is what this means, but not in any cartoony way. Here is a Quran. This is the recitation from Gabriel to Muhammad. And again, like Moses, they say Muhammad was a prophet after Moses, in the likeness of Moses. And for Muslims, where they disagree with Christians is, Jesus is sinless, they think. They even think he was born a virgin. And they agree with Catholics, but not Protestants. Even his mother Mary had an immaculate conception. Muslims agree with that. What they don't agree with is that Jesus was God. They agree with Jews. No human can be divine. All of these things, you become a Muslim. I was in Palestine once, and I'm a when in Rome kind of guy. I said, La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah. If you say that, the guy next to me said, oh, you are a Muslim. I said, well, no, not really. And this saying one of your famous things you say. But that is all I have to do to be a Muslim. Just believe there's no God but God, and Muhammad is his prophet. If I say that, I am a Muslim. Giving to the poor is required in Islam. You can make the pilgrimage wonderful. You can pray 3 up to 5 times a day. And then that is what you do. Fasting during Ramadan from dawn to dusk. You don't have sex or eat food. And then, if you're a Muslim, you end up in the 7th heaven. If you're a Christian, you get to go to number 6. Jews get to go to number 5. Buddhists get to go to hell. They don't believe in God. They're not a people of the book. Islam is tolerant of the other Abrahamic religions and thought they had all of them. Muhammad thought Jews are going to convert to this. But they're forced to flee Mecca. This is the beginning of their history when the Meccan temple establishment runs Muhammad out of town and he creates a socialistic utopia in Medina. So that's the beginning of Islam. And Muslims model their life on Muhammad, and what they'll tell you is, you can actually live a life like Muhammad, but you can't live a life like Jesus. If everyone lived like Jesus, the economy would crumble, right? We'd all have to give up our things to follow God and follow Christ. So Muhammad has what they feel is a more reasonable faith. And so Muslims model their lives after this human being who is an honest man, who is a legislator, a governor, a military leader. All these things Jesus Christ did not deal with, but Moses and friends did. So Islam is mostly like Judaism and Sharia law. People are so angry about is modeled off so many elements from the Old Testament or Hebrew Bible that too seems tragic to me. And here is the Shiite world, and here is the reason for the conflict. This is Muhammad's cousin Ali. He will marry the lovely Fatima, depicted here. Isn't she lovely? See how these abstract calligraphies can be male and female, right? Or at least stereotypically female. He marries her, and he's genealogically, genetically related to Muhammad. And the Shiites say, that makes you special. So in the news next time, you'll see these ayatollahs, right, ayatollahs in black turbans. The black turban is like the star on a star-bellied sneetch. It means I am descended from Muhammad, and you're not. The Sunnis say, hello, that is not what Muhammad taught. They have this holy genealogy. They believe that the Mahdi will return. Some thought Ayatollah Khomeini was this Mahdi. He said, no, I'm not, but he's coming soon. They think he's still alive. There's no death date for him, if you notice. And guess who comes with the Mahdi at the end of times for Shiites? None other than Jesus of Nazareth. What a surprise. But the Sunnis will tell you, and then they'll engage in recapitulating the martyrdom of Ali and his son Hussein. So now we see even our president is named after these famous martyrs of Islam and the early Islamic movement. Mystical movements will emerge that based on the collision of Islam with Buddhism. And then the Turks will be pressing upon Europe in this time of Martin Luther. So that Martin Luther is not only a heretic according to the Roman Catholic Church, he is a traitor to the Holy Roman Empire. A lot of people miss that side of why the Catholics were trying to kill Martin Luther. And so the Turkish Empire, and Muslims are very conscious of having had 1,000 years of one Islamic mega empire. It dissolves in World War I, as we know. Why are Muslims mad at the West today? Well, here is part of the story. Would you not be mad at China if China, let's say, had dominated Wisconsin, ruled it militarily for some decades? Japan, let's say, had conquered and ruled California? Might there be some Asians for this kind of thing? Then we get, and then here are all the empires. The colonial period is what drove this huge spread of Christianity globally and alienated quite a few people. And then this is, I hope to get the science a little bit, but I did too much. But let's look at this awareness competency. Matter of fact, I asked my students, would you rather, if you had to choose the Orthodox nun or the Catholic nun or the Orthodox Jew or the Muslim woman's garb, which would it be? Generally, I get either the Jewish lady or the Muslim lady. But these are Bible fashions. The Puritans, look at this Puritan pilgrim here. Bible fashions, head coverings. This Amish lady, nobody thinks of her. Hey, take that hat off, Amish lady, your husband's pressing you. No. And when we talk about Quranic dress, this woman is dressed like the Quran suggests. This is what you really want to wear in the desert, believe me. I went out in the desert with shorts on with a buddy and a German guy and his wife. His wife covered all up like this and had cream all over her, what bit of her face was showing. He said, you guys are very stupid. You're going to die outside the desert. Irina, we're going to be fine. And the big guy, he was the canary in the mine. He was fainting. He couldn't move. A Palestinian Christian family picked us up because we were like someone wearing a bikini in a blizzard. In Wisconsin, where you can say, hey, you crazy nut, get out of that blizzard. You don't wear bikinis in a blizzard. So that's really what's going on. Muslims will tell you the Virgin Mary dressed the same way, but somehow we don't blame her. Some pictures of the largest Islamic art, and then here the Israel problem from the Muslim point of view. Why are the British deciding how to slice up this land? And here we go, there's King David and Solomon's empire. There's their independence from the Greeks for 100 years, time of Hanukkah. And then in the 20s, and especially after the Holocaust, Jews are going to pour into this land. And for Palestinians, though, and I met one family who lived in the same house since the year 900. That's a long time to live in a house, isn't it? So even for Jews and Samaritans who lived there, this looks like an invasion backed by the British and the Americans. It's important, I think, to consider that perspective.